January 24th, 1848. A cold Monday morning in the Mexican territory known as Alta California. James Marshall, a carpenter from New Jersey, is inspecting the tail race of a sawmill he's building for John Sutter. The water is clear, biting cold, and shallow. Suddenly, something catches the morning light, a glimmer. Not the dull glint of a polished stone, but something metallic, something heavy. Marshall reaches down, his fingers numbed by the American River, and picks up a piece of metal the size of a pea. He would later write, "My heart beat fast, for I was certain it was gold." He wasn't a scientist, he wasn't a prospector, but in that single moment, James Marshall didn't just find a yellow rock. He pulled the pin on a hand grenade that would blow the world's economy apart. He triggered the largest mass migration in human history. Welcome to the California Gold Rush. This is not just a story of wealth. It is a story of greed, genocide, the birth of the American dream, and the construction of a global empire built on a foundation of dust and desperation. John Sutter, the owner of the land, was terrified. He didn't want a gold rush. He wanted an agricultural empire. He swore Marshall to secrecy. They tried to keep the genie in the bottle. But in a world of gossip and whiskey, secrets have a very short shelf life. By March, a local merchant named Sam Brannan, a man who would become California's first millionaire without ever digging for gold, found out. He didn't start digging. Instead, he bought every shovel, every pan, and every bag of flour in the region. Then, he walked through the streets of San Francisco, holding a glass vial high above his head, shouting, "Gold, gold, gold from the American River." The town literally emptied overnight. Sailors abandoned their ships, cooks left their kitchens, soldiers deserted their posts. The fever had begun. For months, the East Coast of America thought it was a hoax. California stories were treated like sightings of sea monsters. But then, the evidence arrived in Washington, D.C., a tea caddy containing 230 ounces of pure, unadulterated gold. On December 5th, 1848, President James K. Polk stood before Congress. He needed to justify the recent controversial war with Mexico. He needed to prove that California was worth the blood and treasure spent to acquire it. The accounts of the abundance of gold in that territory are of such an extraordinary character as would scarcely command belief, were they not corroborated by the authentic reports of officers in the public service. That was the official go signal. The President of the United States had just told a nation struggling with poverty and debt that there was free money lying in the dirt 3,000 miles away. By January 1849, every port in the Atlantic was a scene of chaos. This gave birth to the 49ers. They weren't just Americans. They were Chinese peasants fleeing famine. They were French revolutionaries escaping political ruin. They were Australians, Chileans, and Brits. But getting there? That was the first test of who deserved to be rich. If you lived in New York, you had three choices. 3 ways to die. Option 1, the Cape Horn route, 15,000 miles on a wooden ship. You face the deadliest storms on Earth at the tip of South America. If the waves didn't kill you, the scurvy did. Option 2, the Panama shortcut. You sail to the jungle, trek through malaria-infested swamps, and pray a ship picks you up on the other side. Thousands died of yellow fever before they ever saw a single gold flake. Option 3, the Overland Trail. 2,000 miles across a continent that didn't want you there. You walked, you pushed wagons, you buried your children in shallow graves by the side of the trail. Why? Why would a father leave his wife and 5 children to face this? Because in 1849, the average worker earned $1 a day. In California, reports said you could make $50 a day just by bending over. It wasn't a job. It was a lottery ticket where the jackpot was your life. By the summer of 1849, the Sierra Nevada mountains were crawling with over 100,000 men. They called themselves Argonauts, chasing a golden fleece, but the reality was far from Greek mythology. It was a Darwinian nightmare. The gold wasn't just sitting there in neat stacks. It was trapped in the pay dirt, the ancient gravel of dried-up riverbeds. To get it, you had to stand knee-deep in ice-cold mountain water for 12 hours a day, while the California sun baked your brain to a crisp. But physical pain was only half the battle. The real killer was the economy of the camps. You see, in the diggings, gold was plentiful, but life was expensive. A grain of gold was worth nothing if you couldn't eat. Let's look at the prices in a typical camp like Hangtown or Murderer's Bar. A loaf of bread? $2, roughly $60 today. A pound of sugar? $4. A single egg brought by mule over the mountains? $1. There are records of miners paying an ounce of gold, $16 then, nearly $2,000 today, for a single bottle of mediocre brandy. Sam Brannan, the man who shouted in the streets of San Francisco, understood this better than anyone. He once said, "A merchant can make more from a miner than a miner can ever make from the earth." While the 49ers were breaking their backs, Brannan was making $2,000 a day, selling them the very tools of their misery. And then there was the law, or rather, the lack of it. California wasn't a state yet. There were no courts, no police, no jails. If a man stole your claim, you didn't call a lawyer. You called your friends and reached for your Colt revolver. Justice was swift, brutal, and often delivered at the end of a rope tied to a sturdy oak tree. As the easy gold began to disappear, the American dream began to curdle into xenophobia. At first, the camps were a melting pot. You had Sonorans from Mexico, who were the most skilled miners. You had the Chinese, who were the most industrious. And you had Europeans from every corner of the map. But when the pans started coming up empty, the white American miners, many of whom had traveled from the slave-holding South or the crowded North, decided that the gold belonged only to them. In 1850, the newly formed California legislature passed the foreign miners' tax. It was a blatant shakedown. Every non-American had to pay $20 a month just for the right to dig. It was an impossible sum.
The Americans chase us from the rich ground. They cut our queues. They burn our tents. We find the gold they throw away, and yet they hate us for our survival.
The Mexicans were driven out. The Chinese were forced into laundry work or domestic service, building the foundations of a racial hierarchy that would haunt California for a century. But the darkest chapter wasn't written in taxes or laws. It was written in blood. Before 1848, the California Indians numbered around 150,000. By 1870, less than 30,000 remained. They were hunted for sport. Their land was poisoned by mercury used in mining, and their food sources were destroyed. The gold rush wasn't a tide that lifted all boats. It was a tsunami that drowned the original inhabitants of the land. By 1853, the era of the individual miner was dead. The surface gold was gone. To get the deep gold, you needed machines, you needed capital, you needed the hydraulic giants. Companies began using massive iron nozzles to blast entire mountainsides into slush. It was incredibly effective and environmentally catastrophic. Millions of tons of silt clogged the rivers, flooding farms and killing the San Francisco Bay. And what of the men who started it all? James Marshall, the man who found the first flake, died penniless in a small cabin, bitter that he never received a cent for his discovery. John Sutter, the man who dreamed of an agricultural paradise, saw his land stolen, his cattle slaughtered, and his empire crushed by the very people he tried to welcome. He spent his final years in Washington, D.C., pleading with Congress for compensation that never came. The gold rush built the Transcontinental Railroad. It built the skyscrapers of San Francisco. It funded the Union in the Civil War. But it was built on the broken spirits of the men who arrived first. The California Gold Rush was never just about the metal. It was the first true explosion of the global age. It proved that a person could start with nothing and, through sheer grit or pure luck, change their destiny forever. It defined the American West, but it also left a scar on the land and its people that remains to this day. We often look back at these men and women as legends, but they were just like us, chasing a dream, terrified of failure, and looking for a better life. The gold is mostly gone now, but the spirit of that madness, it's still in the DNA of every dreamer who heads west. Thank you for embarking on this journey through history with us today. If you found this deep dive into the 1849 Gold Rush fascinating, there's a simple way to support the channel. Hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that history matters. And if you want to be there when we uncover our next mystery, from the lost treasures of the Civil War to the dark secrets of the Gilded Age, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. What do you think? Was the gold rush a triumph of the human spirit or a cautionary tale of greed? Let's keep the conversation going in the comments below. I read as many as I can.